Hello and welcome to today's TAFETalks session, which is on student engagement strategies. My name is Lyndall Manson and I am the Director of Governance, Policy and Projects at TDA. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we meet today. I'm in Naarm, which is in Melbourne, and on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to any First Nations peoples that are joining us today. If you would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that you are currently on, please feel free to do so in the chat. We would love to hear from you. Today's TAFETalk session will focus on students and student engagement. So we have a range of presentations which approach the topic from a few different angles, including strategies to make learning enjoyable, some practical ways that we can support struggling students, and enhancing the experience of international students. For the discussion today, we are joined by one of TDA's valued and long-standing corporate affiliates, Technology One. I'd like to introduce Peter Nicolatatis, who is the Industry General Manager for Education at Technology One. And I sincerely thank Peter and Technology One for its ongoing support to TDA over the years and for participating in our TAFETalks session today. Thanks, Peter. Peter will also be joined by a number of speakers from TAFE Queensland. I'd also like to introduce Emma Rice, who is the Senior Advisor for Learning and Teaching, Jo Ward, the Team Leader Reporting and Analytics, and Marty Locke, who is the Manager, International Engagement and Communications, also from TAFE Queensland. In terms of the format for today, we will hear from all of our speakers first, starting and ending with Peter, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions from our audience. If you have a question for one of our presenters today, it would be appreciated if you could put your question into the Q&A box. It just helps us keep track of them a little bit better. And just so that you are all aware, today's session is being recorded and the recording will be made available to everyone who registered for today's TAFETalks, and it will also be put up on the TDA website. Please also note that closed captioning is available for this event. It now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Peter Nicolatatis from Technology One to kick off today's presentations. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Lyndall, and thanks everybody for joining today. For those who I haven't met, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Awabakal people from my hometown of Newcastle and pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. For those I haven't met, I did want to speak a little bit about what my role is at Technology One just before I get into my presentation. I'm what they call an Industry General Manager, and part of my focus is to understand in detail the VET and TAFE sector, not only in this country, but of course in other geographies in which we operate, and understanding nuances of how that operational model or that business model works, and apply that into the design of our solutions and what we take to market when we promote our software solutions. Today's presentation, I'm going to explore some student engagement strategies that I've been working on, and that entails a few different areas. So let me just press my forward button. We quite often hear about gamification, and it's a really interesting topic. So many of us that have grown up in the last few decades in various schools or various mediums have probably been aware of gamification, but not realized its influence in education design. In fact, it's probably the most common way in which fine motor skills are developed. People have been using computers or iPads or small form factor devices for quite a long period of time. But even prior to that, if you think about how we were taught a few decades ago in a primary classroom, there was an award or a reward system, stars, ticks, things that acknowledge your basically participation or engagement in activities. If you fast forward that and introduce a digital objective to it, we've simply just morphed that into a digital process. Go back about 10 or 15 years ago when we first discovered MOOCs in the learning environment. MOOCs were the massive open courses that were available free of charge. And one of the premises of how they were meant to be achieved or delivered in the marketplace were rewards. So if you did something like a short course, you wanted to get acknowledgement. Add that to your CV or to your LinkedIn profile, whatever mechanism you do to promote. But again, it was about a recognition model. So features such as point systems, badges, have all been really important design elements that have now been put into our education strategies. The idea is to actually harness what's valuable about games. So we know that many of students that are coming through from primary and secondary are engaged in games, and harnessing the power of that sort of collective, but introducing that into the classroom and using it as a mechanism to capture and engage with students. So it's got potential to do a number of things: increase engagement, motivation, and retention of information, because people like to get rewards. And as they get rewards, it's part of that learning process. It's reinforced in basically whatever they do. Now, of course, with everything that we do and areas that we look at, there's always got to be things that you've got to consider. What is there an equity issue here? Because not everybody, for example, has access to devices at home. Not everybody has access to an easy learning space. We discovered that largely under COVID, where it was fantastic in some ways to suddenly work from home, if you can see a silver lining in that few years of the pandemic. But then we had another conundrum where not everybody had the luxury of their own device, their own tools, their own space. So when we think about how we introduce gamification into our education strategies, we need to be mindful of, does that process work in the age group or the demographic that's being taught at the moment? Does it exactly work for the people that we think it's designed for? So you have to be cautious in how you introduce gamification. But that said, I think there's a lot of merit in gamification design in education strategies. There's a lot of examples out there. One that jumps out to me more recently, of course, is with the investment in STEM technologies. Groups like the Khan Academy, amongst many others, have really introduced a gamification type process in reintroducing STEM and making it an enjoyable learning process. Peer collaboration. This one's always been a favorite of mine. It's probably the most reflective way of emulating what does it look like to work in a workforce. Suddenly, you're forced into working with a group of people with disparate skills, different approaches, different leadership styles, different communication styles. But peer collaboration is a really important element of design of education. What it does in some ways is, in an ideal world, harness the strengths of individual participants, but in the collective, design a better outcome or a better process. The challenge, of course, if you think about it, and we've introduced peer collaboration from very, very early on in primary and secondary, when we bring groups of people together to work on a like-minded project or a common project. Almost immediately, somebody determines, who the leader of that group is, and then, of course, the debate on, the process, the outcome, roles and responsibilities. But I do think peer collaboration is a very important design, and it's important that we introduce that into our learning strategies, because it is the best emulation of how an organization works. For example, if I was to look at how Technology One works, we're a group of people, around 1,200, based in multiple geographies, and we operate under what we call a tribe type model. So we bring people from disparate parts of our business with specific skills in their discipline, but we aggregate them together into a tribe that looks at solving issues that are impacting the whole business. So everybody brings something unique to that discussion. So tribes are a really important part of our business model, and I'm sure that's relevant in other industries going forward. So if you think about elements of where peer collaboration works, it is about getting a broader range of skills, learning to work with multiple types of personalities, because that is really a reflection of how the workplace actually works. But also being able to receive peer feedback. One of the things that most people find confronting is getting feedback. It's quite nice to give feedback, but often when people get feedback, they find it a little bit challenging. if you take it in the intent that it was given to you constructively and for improving your learning and your knowledge and your advocacy, then I think it's a very, very powerful tool. If it's used incorrectly, it can actually make people uncomfortable. But again, this is part of the learning process. So peer collaboration to me is a very important part of design. So when that gets introduced into a learning strategy, it's important that careful planning, clear communication, and a balance between collaborative and individual styles is recognized. If you are a leader in a peer group, it's important that you understand what everyone brings to the table. Everyone has a voice, everyone contributes to the outcome. And the other thing I just want to sort of touch on briefly is implementation strategies. If you think back for the last couple of years, when we sort of went into a pandemic mode, we were forced largely to work from home almost instantaneously. Not that most institutions weren't already working on a hybrid model of online and face-to-face teaching, but suddenly we were forced to work very much in the online world. And when you're in the online world, video and tools like Zoom, etc., are probably the most common tool used. But one of the challenges with these types of technologies, how do you make them interactive? How do you make them engaging? How do you get to hear the tone and the voice of everybody? Imagine suddenly a classroom of a few hundred people on a Zoom call where all the videos are muted and all the audios are muted. The connection between yourself as an educator and the class becomes much more difficult. So interactive learning styles or interactive content has to be designed around the mediums and tools that are being used. In a classroom situation, a face-to-face where you've got a one-to-many, it's probably a little bit easier to do. But a lot of time has to be taken in the design on the online world to ensure that that collaboration, that interactiveness is really important. And when it's done well, it does enhance engagement. That means that the content is designed to run on the medium in which it's presented. So if you think about a traditional way of teaching in a face-to-face environment, simply just picking that up and trying to run it in an online environment may not be as effective. So you have to tailor the way you basically do that. It has the potential, and there was some great literature written about retention in the online world. I'd seen articles that would challenge that the online world is nowhere near as retentive as face-to-face teaching. And that was actually refuted. In fact, online is a very effective way of retention if it's constructed correctly and the concepts are done and aligned very well. And it also adds to personal skill development, because what you do is you adapt learning technologies and you customize learning paths for individual learning styles. And it gives you that broader range of how you construct engagement and learning strategies. So before I hand over to my peer, I just wanted to summarize a couple of things. Gamification is an important way of learning. I mean, just look at any shopping center, classroom, home, environment. You can almost see kids today or young adult learners are connected to devices. They're constantly doing things. Probably the only thing a device like a mobile phone is not used for is to make phone calls. It's a conduit to the cloud. It draws information from many, many sources and allows that social connection. Yes, I can understand that most people think that's an isolation as well, or there's elements of isolation involved, but it's a technology that's part of our everyday life. So how we harness that and leverage the tools or the way that technology can be leveraged for great or better learning outcomes is very important. And to me, gamification is a really important part of that. The only thing I would probably want to be cautious about is in any learning strategy or use of technology or adaptive learning style, be cautious of the pitfalls. Diverse learning styles. Adult learners learn different from students straight out of high school, for example. So when you have a diverse range of cohorts in different ages and different skills, you have to be adaptive to learning different learning styles. Gamification is not a one shoe size fits all, but it's a tool that can be used and harnessed in a learning strategy, as is other areas of learning and technology enablement. So I'll pause there now. I'll hand back to you, Linda, and I'll pass on to the next presenter.
Thank you very much, Peter. There's some interesting points coming out there. Gamification is an important way of learning, and particularly for specific cohorts, as you mentioned there at the end. I think some other points that I took away are that content must be designed to run on the medium that it's intended for it to be effective, and that online learning is and can be effective if it's designed, constructed and implemented effectively. So thank you for that, Peter. Really interesting presentation. I'd now like to hand over to Emma Rice and Jo Ward from TAFE Queensland. Over to you.
Thank you, Lyndall. Thank you, Peter. Thank you to TDA for the opportunity for Jo and I to present on student academic support and engagement at TAFE Queensland, and specifically how we are identifying and supporting students academically at risk. Jo and I have worked on this activity for the past 2 years and have in every presentation, people have really valued the opportunity to see the tool live, which Jo will give us a walkthrough shortly. I'll give you a high-level overview of the practice at TAFE Queensland. Jo will speak, and then I'll talk to you about intervention strategies. For those in the webinar who were at the TDA convention last year, I hope it forms a bit of an update for you. At TAFE Queensland, we engage a number of tools to identify students and cohorts who are experiencing issues at various times along their learning journey, including but not limited to the things that are on the screen. The applicant digital capability self-assessment is available on our website for people interested in studying at TAFE Queensland, and provides them with an idea about the requirements or the digital requirements for studying here, and then links them to training to develop those skills if required. The student online orientation is available 14 days prior to start of study for students to orientate themselves to TAFE Queensland, to all those really enabling things around student rules and responsibilities, learning management system, student support services, etc. There's a survey and a student digital capability survey at the end of that for them to complete. Early experience survey is administered to all newly commencing students within 2 to 3 weeks of start of study, and that measures their satisfaction with enrolment, orientation, accessing resources, courses, course organisation, etc. Everyone would do a student satisfaction survey, which is administered at the end of each semester to new and continuing students enrolled within the semester. And again, that's around satisfaction with their learning environment, assessment, technology, facilities and support services. We have implemented a withdrawal survey in the last year, and that provides us with, that's administered monthly with intervals from commencement of each semester, and surveying students recorded as withdrawing from a program. And we want to find out information about what isn't working for them and how we can make that better. And that's reported through our learner engagement network and our learning and teaching committees, etc. And what we're really excited to be talking about today is the academically at risk student dashboard. And all of this information, helps to achieve that standards for RTO clause 1.7, which requires RTOs to ensure that students receive training, assessment and support services that meet their individual needs and guide continuous improvement. So the academically at risk student dashboard is a proactive approach to providing educators with easily accessible information to address students' issues to produce better outcomes. And it's in 3 parts: identify categories and metrics that may contribute to a student being considered academically at risk, which Jo will talk to shortly. Make individual student information more accessible in contours, which Jo will also show you, to better provide educators a student snapshot and provide them information to start conversations, and provide a summary of early intervention strategies relevant to the student's learning journey. The definition for academically at risk student is provided on the screen for your information. And it's all about improving student satisfaction and successful competency completion rates at TAFE Queensland. The academically at risk model gathers individual and cohort level data on academic progression at specific milestones. Educators are the first point of contact for students requiring additional academic help, and providing everyone with access to data that helps them to identify students who meet one or more criteria aims to provide educators with a simple alert. Educators with students identified as medium to high risk need to look more closely at the student management systems, the students' work, and alongside other relevant student information, and determine if more intensive support is required. And just before Jo takes you on a tour, I just wanted to call out a few specifics. We've spent a lot of time identifying the reasons why and triggers for a student becoming at risk, and have appropriated a score for each item, which you'll see on your screen there. So if they haven't accessed the learning management system in the first 10 days, if they haven't accessed a unit in the last 5 days, if they haven't had any access with their if they haven't submitted their first assessment by the due date, if they haven't achieved the BKSB, so our LLN assessment tool benchmarks, if the teacher hasn't visited the learning management system, and also if they haven't completed their online declaration form. And you'll see there on the right-hand side, there's some scores. So at risk scores 0 to 60 have no colour, 61 to 80 is amber, and students scoring 81 to 100+% are identified as red and requiring immediate intervention. So just like a traffic light, we have to start doing something. Alongside the students at risk score, educators are provided with a student profile that provides information around their ID, their name, etc. But if the student is under 18, the student isn't under 18, if they identify as Aboriginal and/or Torres Strait Islander, if they identify as an international student, if they have a disability requiring support from TAFE Queensland to complete their studies, if they have achieved the BKSB benchmark for their English or math results or not, and also if they've engaged with Studiosity, which isn't a score because we know students will proactively engage with Studiosity. So we just keep a tally there if a student is accessing Studiosity, because that might be a conversation if it's starting to get quite high. Now we'll give Joe, over to you, Joe, and you'll give us a walk through the dashboard and provide an educated view for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. I'll just grab the screen share.
You should have it.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll start sharing Contools. So Contools, it's a funny name, but just to explain, our learning management system at TAFE Queensland is called Connect. And this initially started off as a system called Connect Tools, which was basically about giving teachers good information of how their students were tracking within the learning management system, but without having to go into the learning management system. The benefit of that is it also allowed other people other than teachers, so support officers, managers perhaps, LMS admins, they can all use this system to get a better view of things that are happening in our learning management system without having to troll through it. And we also overlay student management system information and data from other systems in here as well, just to help save people 5-10 minutes per day. So I'll very quickly jump into the guts of what we want to look at today, and that's by trawling into the Connect units. So our learning management system, as you might imagine, has hundreds of thousands of units at any given time. But I'm going to focus today on this particular delivery, FNS ACC 314. I believe it's accounting using a computerized system. And specifically this delivery that's taking place at TQ-TOL, which is the purely online element of TAFE Queensland. And it's for intake 7, which is happening right now. So straight away, we get into details of this delivery within our learning management system at TAFE. We can see that doors opened on the 11th of the 10th. It'll run through until May. We have this many teachers enrolled, many of which have logged in and actually started helping with delivery of this unit, some which haven't right now, probably there just for backup purposes. But then what we're really interested in is this section below where we can start seeing details as to the number of students who are enrolled in the unit. And specifically, when I click out this expansion here, we can get into the details of those students. So what we're trying to do here is just really quickly give teachers a very quick overview as to which students are engaging with the content. We can see of those 16 students, we've got students ranging all the way down from those that haven't visited the unit at all, down to those that are engaging and have been in there since quite early on. And we also start presenting these semaphores. So these semaphores actually help teachers identify whether or not these students have declared themselves as perhaps having a disability, or whether they're under 18, or I think we've got one student in this case who identifies as Aboriginal. So these are overlays which we can present to the teacher using this system, which we can't do via our LMS. They would have to go into the SMS to find that if they've got time. We've also got in here our BKSB benchmarks, which is, as Emma mentioned earlier, we're getting into the LLM space here. And so this gives us, again, very quick visual as to how our students tracked when they completed the BKSB exam. And these students are all doing really well. They're all in the green, which is great. But then we get into the at-risk scores. So this is where we're taking all those metrics that Emma mentioned earlier. rolling them all up into a numeric. It tends to be about 140 to 160 maximum, and then making that into a percentage. And as it is, most of these students are doing pretty well. We don't have any at all that are in the amber range. They're all 59 down all the way to a 0, which is actually a bit of a rarity. So this student is smashing it. But we do have one student up here who's sitting at 96. And we can also see it's one student who hasn't visited yet. So straight away, we can tell that a month into delivery of this unit, this particular student is not engaging in the way we'd hope. But we can go a bit further. We can actually click on that at-risk score. And what it's going to do is load the at-risk dashboard, which the volume of this work has been driven towards. And Emma briefly talked through the two panels here. We've got the panel on the left talking about the student and helping the teacher understand that student a bit more. And then also the means we calculate the at-risk score on the right-hand side here. But then we break it down below, has the student logged into the learning environment? Nope. Have they visited the unit in the learning environment in the last 5 days or 10 days? No, they're really not doing so well, which is leading to these two high scores here. And further down from there, we can actually see scores over time in all the units that the student has ever been enrolled with at TAFE Queensland since they started their study. And pretty quickly, we can get an idea that this student hasn't ever really managed to engage in our learning management system. So there's clearly a bit of a problem there, and we might want to reach out and talk to that student. Conversely, the student who had a 0, we just see lots of green. It's looking really good. They have logged into the environment. They've been engaging in the unit. We haven't reached the first assessment due date yet. That's actually in a few days. But once the student has completed and submitted that assessment, whether or not they passed or failed, we actually mark them on them having actually submitted. So we'll include that in the metrics if and when that happens. If they were to fail, then they'll lose their 0. Or not submit, I should say, they'll lose their 0. So we can track all the way along there, lots of green, this student's doing great. And then down from there, again, we can see tracking over time with all the many units that this student studied with over TAFE in the last year. They've been engaging all the way through. Typically we see a bit of an inverse bell curve. The student starts, it's sitting at about 80, 90, then they get involved, and then it sort of drifts out again as they complete that unit and move on. But this student's been studying intakes with online, and they've just been working really hard all the way through them and engaging with the content. So this is actually a really A+ student, whereas, as we said, that other student, I think somebody might want to reach out and check how they're going. So that covers the live demo. I'll pass back to Emma to carry on.
Want to quickly tell us about the little key that's down the bottom for a student commencing at TAFE Queensland? There you go.
Yeah, the little key. So we've got them kicking over the starting line here, which is 0 to 31 days into their study. Well into their study, they're strolling along at 32 to 62, and then towards the end, they're getting through their assessments at 63 days. These particular students are 0 to 31. We did see that the unit opened on the 10th of September. We actually give them slightly early access at TAFE. They get 5 days early access. So this unit actually started just under a month ago, which is why we're seeing that 31 days. But again, just a bit of an indicator to help teachers understand where their students are tracking. So this information makes more sense to them. Thank you, Emma. I'll flip back.
Thanks, Joe. I'll go back to sharing. And you showed us a really great example of a student who was being very successful. Sorry, just bringing up my screen. Okay. The academically at risk data sits alongside the educator's own support processes used to identify students who are having difficulties with their study as early as possible. And teachers are doing that from the first moment they set eyes on a student, from the first time they communicate about what they're encouraged to do and why they're passionate to be there. We have provided educators with good practice examples for engaging students across their journey and information about what types of support is more effective in helping the students to successfully complete their studies, which I'll show you shortly, through a summary of early intervention strategies relevant to the student's learning journey. And these tools to support the staff member to identify areas of concern and possible referral points. They can then develop a plan with the student and the relevant support service. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to jump through a few slides, but I have provided the slides to Palak and she'll send them out for you. So you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, that's where the student is on their learning journey by the image. And the center is the possible concern, incident or trigger. And then on the third side column is the suggested type of intervention available to educators and support staff at TAFE Queensland. And also on the top right, you'll see there that little symbol that Joe just went through about the students just starting their study. For us, it's about identifying academically at-risk scores and indicators that contribute to students' learning outcomes. And whilst this is important, the next step is as crucial for staff and for students. It helps us to identify the area of concern and where the student's having difficulty and prioritise the issues. And you'll see there on the right-hand, so for students starting at TAFE Queensland, if the student is unclear about what the course requires of them, on the right-hand side, the intervention would be to make sure that we review our information requirements and ensure individual learners know prior to their enrolment and commencement what there is expected of them. Ensure all students are enrolled and aware of the date and time of the orientation. So we have a number of students saying, I don't know where my class is and what time it starts. Ensure course marketing provides clear information about what students can expect while studying, including coursework to be completed. Identify any support requirements and ensure the prospective student understand the digital capability skills required to study. If the SMS indicators, which you showed us before, and the semaphores, Joe, if there are indications, you may be required to apply reasonable adjustment for the student for those who are identified as having a learning disability or unique circumstances. As I said, I won't go through each slide. This is if a student fails to attend or to complete orientation, ensure that they complete the student online orientation as in the first week, and that they complete their campus and course orientation face-to-face if possible. Encourage students complete their declaration, and we saw that was a at-risk factor because that's where they find out information about how to log in, how to get support, and where to get the password if they don't know how to access. Provide support to the student with timely access to digital learning content and encourage student to access early and engage quickly, and reinforce support options that are available at TAFE Queensland. And for late enrolments, they're on the screen. Encourage access early and engagement. If they appear to have literacy and numeracy difficulties, refer them to the student support services and ask them to undertake the recommended LLN intervention, and remind students that all the supports that are available to them. And it goes on to if the student receives a BKSB result lower than 1 or lower than 2, and if that affects the learning comprehension, then the teacher is to remind them of those services as well. We have different requirements for TAFE at school students, as does everybody else, if the student is under 18 or if they're an apprentice or a trainee. Again, I'm just going to skip through a few slides. It's important for us to note that as we're getting through the student's learning cycle, that we have to kind of step up our intervention practices. So we're going to start it's going from informal, it's moving through to a bit more formal, and we're going to start having our conversations with managers and making sure students are engaged and on track quickly. So absenteeism, limited no attendance, talk one-on-one with the student, ensure the student is aware of the expectation student rules, commence withdrawal process if 3 attempts have been made to contact the student without response. For TAFE at school students, we have an early indication observation of an issue. We have to contact the school urgently, and if appropriate, contact the guardian. And we raise that issue on an internal pathway report that goes between TAFE Queensland and the school. If it's a lack of assessment completion per the schedule, the teacher would meet with the student and have those tutoring supports, make sure that they're aware of the requirements, make sure that your instructions for the assessment are clear, and directing the student to those services such as Studiosity, library support, information and communication technology support. And we'll be starting to document this information on our academic progression plans. And it's in red, but this is 63 plus days. The student's deep in their studies, and if they're not still progressing, that they are not attending class, that they're not submitting those assessments, we're definitely documenting that information on our academic progression plan. For international students, Marty, you'll go through shortly and tell us what that looks like, but definitely notifying TAFE Queensland International for progression to Home Affairs. Apprentices and trainees escalate to Educational Support Manager, Employer and Apprentice Networks. And for TAFE at school students, it's about advising the school, reporting on pathways, and advising the guardian as appropriate. This data is to help educators to identify issues early and start a conversation with the student. Staff might have already had a chat and redirected the student, got them back on track, and that's really great. And we found that throughout with this this data has been available to educators now since the 9th of November 2022. And that's the anecdotal feedback we're getting is like, it's just really great. I get a snapshot of my class. I know who's in there. I can differentiate my learning, but I also know who to hone in on and provide that extra support to. And yeah, staff might also know that someone is struggling and require intense support, at least for a period of time. Engaging with the students early, including putting messages on LMS, send out an email within the first week to introduce themselves is important. Making sure students have everything they need to learn and ensuring that they can access the LMS, are oriented to TAFE Queensland, the campus and the course, and are aware of how and where to gain support. And just as important is for the educators to know how to get support. And we found that through this project that educators are now talking to support services much more and earlier. The dashboard was made available, like I said, on November 9th, and they've reported feedback, which is on the slide. And we invite them to access the data regularly via broadcast, prompting them to follow up with students in red and those who are coming amber. And we know that it works for educators when they capture a student within the first 4 weeks of study. And if the student is going to participate and be successful, they'll do that in that period of time. Engage with the data early and need to understand how to interpret the data, which I think we've worked a lot on, Joe, over the last year and making sure it's really clear. And we also note that efficacy very much depends on how well the educator has set the learning materials up with the due dates, etc. And that's a wrap. Over to you, Marty. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to take it on to the angle around international students and how we engage the international community to not only improve their experience, but also to amplify that for all of us that are involved in this space. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a history around our story and how we've got to where we are today and who we are. So for TAFE Queensland International Education, we have a dedicated engagement student support team across selected campuses where we have a majority of our international cohorts. And the purpose around that is to engage with our students prior to the study, during their study, and eventually we want to go into that nice golden zone of after study when they've graduated and they become alumni. We're a small team to begin with, and we've only been in operation for about a year. Obviously, with a post-COVID environment, we try and not look as that as being a moment in time. We've passed now, we've moved on, the borders are reopened, but we are seeing the hangover of some of the effects from COVID affecting our students to today. But there are new challenges that we are being faced with our international student community that actually isn't any different to our domestic students. And there's a lot of commonality between things like finance, employment, and accommodation that sit outside the academic realm of what our students are going through. And one of the things I always like to encourage our educators and our support staff is that international students aren't any different to our domestic students, and that there's actually some common ground between them. But there are some little nuances that we need to address with international students, things like their visa conditions, but there are other elements that we need to take into account, such as cultural differences, learning and language ability, and even the difference in our education systems can be quite daunting. Then there are other challenges as well as being a government entity that sometimes can carry a negative as well as a positive persona for students. So how they view that in relation to their own country's governance. And also their expectations. You know, they are leaving their home country, coming and embarking a new journey in Australia and you know, wanting to make a difference in their life. So some of the things that we look at when we are engaging with the international student is that there are some key impacts on their journey. And some of these key impacts I've already mentioned before: finance, employment, and accommodation. But why is that so important? And that's one of the things that I I like to work with our team and share with everyone in this industry in particular. And I guess one of the things I always say to a lot of staff across TAFE Queensland is that, I get you to think about your typical day on campus, and it's like, what do you see around you? What's the most likely look and feel of the students on campus, their ages, their ethnicities, their cultures? What languages are you hearing being spoken on campus? Look at the way that they're dressing, and even the food and the music that they're listening to between class. And you actually start to unpack how different everyone is. And even from a generational point of view, when we look at everything from baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials, and now Gen Alpha, there is a lot of differentiation of how we can apply our support and our learning environment to different generations, let alone different nationalities, cultures, and religions. So to give you some context for the international side of it, it's actually quite interesting for our own knowledge that Australia is actually more than 0.25% of multicultural people were born overseas. I fall into that category. I was born in New Zealand and moved over here 23 years ago. During the pandemic, we saw at least 500,000 students on a visa in Australia. And when the borders reopened, we saw significant growth of international students returning to our shores, which was a very positive sign for us, as we do pride ourselves as a inviting and embracing and diverse country. So one of the things that we looked at was obviously there is an economic factor to having international students come into our communities and study with our institutes. And one of the key things that go hand in hand with that is making sure that these students who were spending their well-earned money, they were receiving the quality of education that we all strive for. So again, when it comes down to their experience inside the classroom, we look at how we can support them. And I guess one of the biggest things that we've been a big advocate for across TAFE Queensland, and I see it along our other colleagues interstate, is that diversity is very key. And it's all about the language we use. And it's not necessarily speaking the language of where our students come from. And in my team, we have 30 different languages that we can cater to. But it's actually our body language. It's the non-verbal communication that's really important. And it's the way that we present ourselves and the way we engage with students. It's as funny as it may seem to some. I do engage with people, and sometimes they're sort of shouting at you, and it's like, you don't need to shout at them. They're not deaf. They just need to slow down in our speech and our jargon, because they're trying to translate in their own mind to their language back into English, so then they can have that conversation. And sometimes we need to just take a breath, and pace it out at a way that they can understand. It's also about sharing experiences, and this is a two-way street. And it's one of the things I always embrace across our sector, is that as much as it's about international students learning the Australian way and having an Australian experience, it's also our own students here locally that are embracing that international experience. And it's really interesting, because I do see a lot of institutes and universities in particular where they're showcasing their graduates going to London, going to America, going to Singapore, and doing amazing work as a result of their studies with that particular university. And it's interesting, because if they hadn't have been involved with an international student in their journey, they may have not undertaken an offshore placement or seek employment outside of Australia. The other thing too, it's around how we talk to people and how we do regular check-ins. And one of the things with the international cohort community we have is around regular interactions. And what Joe and Emma showed with the intervention early at risk identification framework is that actually helps us being able to engage with students. And obviously the semaphores, we're able to then tag them as international students. We are then able to reach out really early on into their journey with their studies and actually put them back onto a corrective path rather than a punitive path. And obviously our intention is to make sure that they all graduate. We don't want to get down that punitive path where we then have to engage with home affairs and cancel their study with us. Our intent is never to lead down that path. Obviously, we do have instances where we do. Our action is always to try and get them back onto track and succeed to a graduate outcome. The other thing I always like to share with my team as well is that it's always okay to learn from our mistakes, and learning from our mistakes only provides better opportunities for us to improve our ability to provide a better experience for our international students. So to unpack that even more, it's all about unpacking the student journey. And for most people, we might think the journey starts when they come to class and they attend their orientation. And then 2 weeks into it, they've got an assessment and the teachers are doing their regular check-ins as per our framework. For us, we actually noticed that our journey actually starts way, 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 way back before the enrollment stage. In fact, it actually is right to the very first inquiry where that's our first touch point. And it's that nurturing environment, that communication to say, we value your inquiry, we want to bring you on this journey, and we want to lead you to this outcome. And that's where we have started to build in nurture communication and engagement early on that allows us to make sure that these students, they know that they're spending their money in a well received and a deserved quality outcome. And so what we start to then do is we actually start to identify and lead information to them. One of the key things I've learned about being in this industry is we are very good at giving information, but it's also giving information at the right part of a student journey. And I've seen a lot of practices, not good or bad, just practices undertaken where we offload information onto students and we expect them to absorb that like a sponge, and then being able to then go, okay, cool, I remembered all of that, and I know where the policies and procedures are, and I know where I need to go on day one, and I know what I need to bring, and I know I've got PPE gear I've got to go and purchase. Then yet they've got to go and realize, hang on, I know how to get here, I know the bus timetable, I know where to top up my travel card, I know where to top up my SIM, I know where to seek employment, I know how to open up a bank account, get a tax file number, and the list goes on. And what we find is that students start to then become overwhelmed. And when they become overwhelmed, we start to see anxiety set in. When anxiety sets in, we start to see issues arising that impact their academic journey. So from the start of study, we actually then only work on TAFE-specific narratives to support them to say that you are not alone on this. And it stems right through to our relationship with faculty, with our educators, to say that you don't have to understand every single nuance of an international student, whether they come from Indonesia, Brazil, China, or Sweden. The idea is that you've got to give them the same experience as what our Australian students are having. During their study, we obviously do regular check-ins, and the early at-risk stuff really helps us, but we've also put in some practice that every term of every semester, we do welfare checks. We go out and reach out to the students. How are you going? What can we do? Are you engaged? And we obviously identify, we have a lot of surveys through our journey as well. And we use those surveys to help identify where we can provide a better experience, where we can engage with students. How do they want to be engaged with? And it was interesting how Peter talked before about all students, when they walk around, they have a device, predominantly a mobile phone. A secondary device may be a laptop or a tablet. A lot of our students, they may only want to be engaged digitally. They don't want to be engaged face-to-face. But we also want to make sure that our students are safe. And that's one of the key things international students pride Australia on, is that we're a safe country. And regardless of all the memes and social influencers who talk about the deadliest animals in Australia and the crocs and snakes and spiders, we are actually perceived as one of the safest nations on the planet. And that's a really good ticket to really hold up high. So what we want to make sure is that they are safe during their studies. And that means that they feel that they can engage with our teachers, they can engage with our other students, and they can engage with the support staff. Then obviously we want to then build them towards their journey, the completion of their studies. This is the finale, the end result. But actually it's not. The next stage that we've learned to develop is that it's the alumni. And we see this quite strong with the US fraternities and the alumni framework that is over there in America. Now, not to say that we're going to replicate that here in Australia, and I know that in the university sector, they do a great job in that space and it's growing. For TAFE, it's a bit difficult because our students aren't with us for that long in terms of our duration of study. And so therefore, it's a short, sharp, impactful experience, but you want them to be connected, to have pride, to be an advocate, to be able to say, I studied at TAFE, wherever it may be in Australia, and I had the best outcome, I suggest you do the same as well. And so our alumni is actually then looking at how we can develop that into industry advocacy as well as training advocacy. And for the international part, it's actually country advocacy. And we've learned to establish pilot framework around the alumni with our Swedish students, where they talk to each other and encourage each other. It's almost like they are becoming our ambassadors. And, you know, this is something that we are looking at within TAFE Queensland, about having our student body, a student voice, who are advocating and being ambassadors for our future students, both domestically and internationally. Prevention is always better than intervention, I always say. And as I mentioned before, we always want to be correcting our students onto that path. So the early at-risk detection is really key. And 9 times out of 10, our international students are impacted with their academic progression or their attendance, usually by an external factor. And again, I alert to the points I raised before. Accommodation right now across Australia is key. We know that there's a rental crisis. Cost of living is going up. It's no different for an international student. Interest rates, finding employment. There are some benefits for students, especially in the hospitality space. But then there's the rorting of wages and students and international students where English might be a second language. They don't know the governance and policies around employment and their obligations. So then they get, you know, rorted for, and they're undertaking work that they don't like, but they have to. And then they've got their student conditions that they need to meet. So for us, it's around addressing that matter early and how we can support them and get them back onto track, so therefore their academic progression and attendance isn't impacted. Our clear parameters and goals that we establish with our students is that we can always support them. Whether it's their tuition fees, we get them onto a payment plan. If they're having welfare issues and mental health concern, and that's been quite an increase of concern we've seen from a lot of students, is the mental health space. We have counsellors on campus. We work with all the external companies, Lifeline, Beyond Blue, Black Dog, and so forth, to help students embrace that there is support beyond what we can offer them. Surveys and follow-up, that's quite a regular occurrence that we do every term, every semester, start, middle, end of the journey. And then we evaluate the success, and we learn from our mistakes, and we learn from where we've done well, and we showcase that. And this isn't about us being secret about what we're doing. We love to share this with all our colleagues interstate, because together we can improve the experience for all students, really. Building an inclusive...
Marty, just to say, you've got about 1 more minute.
Oh, that's okay.
Time for a few questions.
Down my last 2 slides.
Thank you.
So it's about building an inclusive ecosystem. All stakeholders are really important. The 4 key things we look for is it's respect, empathy, fairness, and accountability for our actions and our language. And it's making sure that we take that all in consideration to build that healthy ecosystem for our students and our educators. So the key takeaway points: it's always take time with our international students. Regular check-ins are always good. Beware of our own cultural biases. I know it's fun sometimes. You know, I hear a lot of Kiwi jokes. I'm seeing a lot in the cricket at the moment around the English, the Australian, and the rugby, and the Wallabies. And it's always fun from a joking perspective, but we've also got to be mindful that that may offend other people. And so it's not to say we've got to watch out on everything we say and we've got to be politically correct, but it's just being aware and learning what our environment is. And engage early to prevent long-term issues. It's always key, and I keep reiterating that. The sooner we can identify this with systems that you can implement, what we've implemented with our systems, we can then move on. That's it. Thank you very much. And I'll hand it back to you, Lyndall.
Thanks so much, Marty. We're just going to circle back now to Peter. Peter, would you like to give some short closing remarks, and then we'll move to Q&A, as we do have a few questions I'd like to get to before we close.
Absolutely. I'll spend a couple of minutes just very, very quickly. I'll go in the reverse order. Australia is now the most popular destination for international students. During COVID, of course, we had borders closed down, services, shutdowns, lockdowns, etc. And I can tell you now, our UK colleagues here, which I'm in the UK at the moment, and Canada benefited from international students being able to go there rather than to Australia, but we've reversed that now. So you've made some really good observations about international students. If colleagues, if you get a chance to read some of the articles that Jenny Dodd, the CEO of TDA, has been commenting around the University Accord. There's some really hot topic around international students at the moment, not just in our region, also in the UK. They're now introducing caps on international students. And so there's a very interesting sort of literature around international students. But for us in Australia, it is actually a very important lifeline to have them come to Australia. We are a safe place. We have a fantastic education system, and it's not just an education experience, it's a cultural experience. It's lifelong friends that are formed because of international engagement. So it's great that we're investing quite heavily in that. The other comment I want to make about at-risk students, I know that's a really important aspect of not only in the vet, but also in the university sector. Attrition rates have a profound impact on commercial impacts. If you can imagine, planning and forecasting the running of programs and suddenly losing students, losing 5%, 10%, 20% of your cohort has an immediate impact. By the way, it's no different to industry. We invest quite heavily on identifying at-risk staff when they join us. We set up a buddy system. We do many of the things that are done at your institutions to ensure that people that come and join us, because we're not just a supplier of technology, we're also an industry stakeholder. We recruit many of our staff from your respective organizations. So we take those learnings into our area to make sure that staff have a really good experience from day one. We identified a few, and thanks to Emma and Joe's presentation, that was a really good tool that's used. And TAFE Queensland, with I think it's 130,000 odd students and campuses, many campuses distributed across Queensland. The other couple of aspects is every student that comes out of secondary almost leaves the safety of their secondary school and their friends to come and study at a new place, a new region, a new city. So that's overwhelming for many people. A lot don't really know what they want to study. They just believe that that's what they're being pressured into. You must go and do more and more study. So it's important during those interventional studies not only to identify at-risk students, but also, are you doing the right program? Do you have the right support? Do you need to take a breathe here and stop and rethink, is this a course that's right for you? Because there are so many opportunities for learning, picking the right courses and being happy and gaining your experience in your discipline, leading to employment in that vocation is hugely important. And that all ties together in identifying at-risk. As a technology supplier, we take a lot of the information you've presented and in our design of our systems, a single view of the student that draws information from all those elements, LMS, library, on-campus, Wi-Fi. Every marker is an indicator of people's experiences. And if we can provide that in a simple, easy to use, and I love the example that TAFE Queensland used, that's a really valuable tool to help administrators act appropriately, but students to also get the best experience at their institutions. Lyndall, I'll hand back to you because I'm mindful there were a few questions.
Thank you so much, Peter. There was a lot of interest in the at-risk data tool. It's obviously a very powerful tool. People were quite interested in intervention strategies, and I know, Emma, you had to jump over a few slides, but we will share the slides from today's presentation for everyone. There are a couple of questions that we've got a couple of minutes just to have a quick look at. Marty, for you, what support or learning do teachers receive regarding international students? And I think this is equally relevant for the at-risk students as well.
Yeah, look, this year we started to, we built a cultural competency unit that we provide through our professional learning framework for our educators and staff across TAFE Queensland. And it basically just identifies ways of how we can engage with the international student community without isolating them. And it builds around the framework that you're not alone when you're doing this. You've actually got support around you, and it just puts in some mechanics around how you address international students. That's, again, it doesn't differentiate it from a domestic students in regards to the academic. It's more around the external stuff. And that's where my team can come in from the welfare perspective.
Emma, have you got any thoughts on that, the support for teachers in terms of the intervention strategies with at-risk students?
Yeah, just what Marty was saying, we hold a number of professional learning sessions per every year through our academic calendar, and a lot of that is around academic progression, student intervention, student support. Yeah, so there's a lot that goes on. I think on average it's about 18 different sessions an educator or a services staff can attend every week. Like, that's an overkill, but we do have a lot of things that people can access, as well as external programs.
Emma, we have just about run out of time, so I will just thank all of our speakers today, and thank you, Peter from Technology One, who's dialed in the middle of the night from the UK. Thank you also to our TAFE Queensland presenters, Jo, Emma and Marty. It was a really interesting and diverse set of presentations today around student engagement and student experience. This is the last TAFE Talks for 2023, but we will be back again in 2024. So thanks again to everyone for your time today, and goodbye for now.